Welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. Today, Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost is going to provide helpful information, tips, and advice for injured workers and their families. Scott's goal is to help you to maximize the benefits you receive. If working's got you hurting, sit back and listen to Scott address topics that matter to you. Scott, welcome back. Glad to have you back in the studio today. We're going to talk about an interesting type of workers' compensation case, and that is dealing with out-of-state workers' comp claims.
Right. This is, I guess, gotten a little bit more prominent now since we've dealt with COVID and people working remotely. But I think people need to know that you can still have a Kentucky workers' compensation claim if you live in another state, Indiana, New York, wherever. If you were injured in the state of Kentucky, even if your employer is based in another state, you can have a Kentucky workers' compensation claim. In certain circumstances, if you have a Kentucky employer or hired in the state of Kentucky and were injured out of state, you can still have a Kentucky workers' compensation claim. So that's important for a couple of reasons. First of all, benefits vary from one state to another. Generally, Kentucky is going to have a little bit better workers' compensation benefits than, say, Indiana. Also, you may want to be able to pursue your claim at different times. There's different statute of limitations and other things that pertain to a workers' compensation claim, and those are all different from one state to another. So it's important to realize that even though you live in one state, you may have a workers' compensation claim in another state, and the benefits and the way you proceed with that can be vastly different. So there's good points in both sides. And you need to explore this just to make sure that you're getting the best type of benefits that you can receive.
You brought up an interesting legal concept. You mentioned something called a statute of limitation, and that is really that little window during which you have to file a claim, right?
Yes. In Kentucky, we have a 2-year statute of limitations for traumatic workers' compensation injuries that runs from the date of the injury or the last time you get paid temporary total disability benefits. Other states have different types of statute of limitations. So let's say you're in a state where there's only a 1-year statute of limitations. You still may be able to pursue a claim in Kentucky if you meet the other circumstances, if you've passed that 1-year statute of limitations.
And so the issue is if you go beyond that window, that calendar or that 2-year calendar here in Kentucky, one of the things that can happen is basically you can't file the claim.
Correct. It's important to talk to somebody to find out exactly when your statute runs. Like I said, it runs from the date of the injury. Sometimes it runs from the date that temporary total disability benefits stop. And non-traumatic injuries that can have other statute of limitations, for instance, exposure to hazard or some other incident. So it's fairly complex, and it's best to talk to an attorney that's in the particular state where you were injured to see what the statute of limitations is for that incident.
Right. And you had mentioned even if you were employed by a company that actually is headquartered here in Kentucky, for instance, let's say you're a field sales rep and you're covering a territory out in Illinois or further out even, maybe out in Kansas, if you can track that company back to a Kentucky presence, again, that may open up to the opportunity to file under Kentucky law.
Right. We call this extraterritorial jurisdiction. If you were hired in the state of Kentucky and let's say your employer had a principal place of business in the state of Kentucky and your job was to travel all over the country and you never really had a particular spot that you worked from, and there's a lot of people that do that, sales reps, truck drivers, technicians, and in all those circumstances, you may be in Oklahoma, which I understand does not have a really great workers' compensation system for injured people. You still may have a Kentucky claim where the benefits are a little bit better. Generally, the employer is going to try to pay you benefits underneath the system that's cheapest for you. So this is something that, if these circumstances apply to you, you need to dig into this a little bit deeper to see what's available for you. And again, Kentucky has a little bit better benefits than most other states. If there's some way to make this a Kentucky claim, you generally want to do that. I've only seen 1 or 2 instances where another state's benefits were actually better. And it doesn't hurt to talk to an attorney. We generally talk to people for free to vet out whether or not there's a claim or not, and it doesn't cost anything to investigate this. So I think the important thing to remember is even though you live in one state, if you're injured somewhere else, you may have a claim in that other state.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, let's assume something's happened and I've been injured, during the normal course of my activities for work. Where do I get started? How do I kind of begin the process?
Well, first of all, for a Kentucky injury, you got to make sure that you have put your employer on notice. You've got to preserve your right to pursue that claim. You've also got to make sure you file a formal workers' compensation claim within the statute of limitations. But the main thing really at the beginning is to make sure you get the benefits you're entitled to receive. Sometimes that's just as simple as telling your boss, I got hurt at work. He contacts the workers' compensation insurance carrier, and they start the claim for you. If you're getting the medical treatment you need, and if you're getting money for being off work, if that applies to you, it still doesn't hurt to talk to somebody about workers' compensation that has a little bit more experience, like an attorney, because they may have steered you to a particular doctor that's more sympathetic to the employer than the employee. You may not be getting all the benefits you deserve. There's several ways to compute the amount of benefits you're entitled to receive. Generally, if there's a mistake in these computations, it's for the employer. So even though you're getting your money and your medical treatment, it's still not a bad idea to talk to somebody, find out what's out there that's available for you to make sure you're being paid the right amount, that make sure you're getting the right kind of treatment. And then once you've gotten the treatment going and you're getting paid, there's still a lot of other things that can happen, especially if you have a permanent injury, right. One that results in a permanent impairment. And that's when you definitely need to get a professional to help you with this, because the type of benefits you receive, the length of the benefits, other things about reopening your claim, future medical treatment, vocational rehabilitation, all those things are on the table. A lot of people don't even know these benefits exist. Generally, the employer or its insurance carrier is not going to be volunteering the information that you have additional benefits. So you really need to talk to somebody that knows what they're doing to find out what's available to you and see if you can pursue those actions for additional benefits.
Well, okay, so if I get hurt, let's say I'm here on an assembly line and I get hurt and I go down to the nurse's aid station and they kind of fix me up a little bit. I let people know, and the nurse says, hey, you know what? You really ought to go see Dr. So-and-so. That's part of our company program. We think you ought to go, get investigated with him or examined by him, and he'll treat you. Sometimes that's called going to the company doctor. Do you want to explain why that may not be to your best interest?
Yeah, and this is a difference in the state's types of workers' compensation systems, too. In Indiana, you're required to go to the company doctor. The company gets to pick out the doctor that's going to treat you, and you have to treat with them. In Kentucky, the company cannot tell you what doctor to go to. You get to pick your doctor. There's some limits on that, and I'm not going to get into all the technicalities, but basically the company cannot tell you what doctor to go to in Kentucky. In general, there's a reason the company wants you to go to the company doctor. It's to save the company money. Company doctors in general have a little bit different protocol about treating folks, about ordering medical treatment, about keeping people off work.
Expensive exams and testing.
Yeah, and in general, these protocols are designed to decrease the costs, which usually means you're not getting the benefits you need or the treatment you need as soon as if you were going to your private doctor. And that's something you can actually do a lot of times in Kentucky. You can go to your private doctor. A lot of people don't believe this because in Kentucky they've been told by their employer they got to go to the company doctor, but again, that's not the law. And you get to pick the doctor you want to go to. Now, that also applies if you're out of state. If you're out of state, a lot of times the company will direct you to a particular doctor. But again, you can still pick the doctor you want to go to. If you have a Kentucky comp claim, you can pick the doctor you want to go to out of state. So the law in Indiana is that you've got to go to the company doctor, and you may live in Indiana, but if you got a Kentucky claim, you still can go to the doctor you pick, even though you live in Indiana.
And when you say the company doctor, I mean, realistically, that's not a doctor who's working for the company. That's not somebody who's there at, say, Ford Medical or something like that. This is another doctor who's got his own private practice or works for a hospital system, but just seems to have an informal relationship and a lot of referrals back and forth between the company and that treating physician, right?
Yeah, I like your description of informal relationship. The folks that we would describe as company doctors generally depend on the employers to send people to them for treatment. That's where they get their business from. They don't have a lot of walk-in traffic from people that were just injured in a car accident down the street. Almost their entire business comes from employers referring people to them. And it seems like they may know where the referrals are coming from, and it seems like they may have a little bit more loyalty to the people, the employers that refer them the business, than the people that they're actually treating. But these companies actively try to get these doctors, should I say, actively try to get companies to refer people to them. And the companies look at this more or less from a cost perspective, and what they're doing is trying to save money. And how are they saving money? They're not getting as much treatment. You're not being off work as long. You're not getting as high impairment rating. There's different ways the company can save money, and
well, it's like
that's
anything
why
in
they're there.
life. So so many of these decisions are subjective, and
Right.
if it's a subjective, well, I could rate it this way or that way. They may give the wink and the nod to the company's benefit, and still be within the medical guidelines. But again, that's something that's not necessarily in the injured worker's benefit.
Correct.
Yeah.
All these are designed to save the company money, and the company has somebody that specializes in workers' compensation that's probably got 50 or 60 claims in front of them. They know how this works. They know where the costs are involved in it. Most people have only had one workers' compensation claim in their life, and it's an eye-opening experience. If you've never had to go through the process, a lot of times you don't know how it works. And some of the companies depend on that. They depend on steering you to particular places that will save them money.
Right.
And it's just natural. Their job is to save money for their stockholders, so that's what they do.
We talk about out of state, and we've mentioned Indiana or Ohio, Illinois, even as far away as Kansas and other places. You've got an interesting case right now that's actually a little bit further away.
Yeah, I've had clients that live all over the world. I've got one that's actually in Guam right now that was injured in Kentucky. I've had folks that were injured in Kentucky that actually live in New Zealand. I've had gentlemen that was from China that was injured in Kentucky and moved to New York afterwards. So we have clients all over the state of Kentucky. We've got a few all over the country and in different spots and even outside of the contiguous United States right now.
And so how do you, obviously they're not going to come to your office, sit down face to face and have a series of meetings with you. How do you handle that?
Well, it's really not that difficult to handle an out-of-state workers' compensation claim. And in fact, it's actually become a little bit easier here with the COVID pandemic because everybody's learned to work from home and deal with Zoom conferences and FaceTime things and stuff like that.
It's a video technology,
yeah,
basically, right?
Yes. And in fact, the workers' compensation system has adapted to a lot of that stuff. I have had clients that never stepped foot in the state of Kentucky that were able to completely resolve their claim without coming to Kentucky. A lot of those cases don't involve litigation, but even in litigation, I've had clients that have given depositions from their home. I've had clients that have given the formal hearings in front of an administrative law judge through video conferencing from their home. So it's amazing how we have adapted to a lot of this stuff, and it's to the benefit of people that live out of state. Basically, what happens is you can handle your entire claim remotely now.
Which has kind of sped up the process for you guys. There's a lot less travel involved at times, and you can actually have more of these procedures or processes going on in a day because you're not traveling to various counties trying to get in front of the judge for the hearings and do all these depositions. It's actually kind of streamlined.
Yes, it has. Yeah, normally in the old days we talk a lot on the phone, and we still do that. And in the old days, we'd get medical records and paper, and now we get faxes and emails and scanned PDFs of documents. And a lot of the medical providers, which we depend on a lot of medical records to show when somebody was injured, what kind of problems they're having, impairment rating, stuff like that. A lot of those are handled electronically now. And our office is essentially paperless. When paper comes in our office, we scan it and then we shred it. But, almost everything in a workers' compensation claim can be done remotely with possibly the exception of getting an impairment rating from a Kentucky doctor. That's probably the only thing that you actually would be required to come to Kentucky for. We can't get the doctors to travel out of state right now, and that would be a little bit cost prohibitive. But other than coming to Kentucky to see a doctor that's familiar with how we do impairment ratings here, almost everything else in the claim can probably be done from out of state.
Well, and that's, you mentioned something called a deposition. You want to explain how that happens in a workers' compensation case? Or claim?
In every workers' compensation claim, we try to resolve them ahead of filing a formal claim that requires litigation. A lot of them we are able to resolve, but, sometimes we can't. If we have to have formal litigation where we have to have a judge make a decision, as part of what we call the discovery process, the defendant has a right to take the deposition of the claimant. And the deposition is basically a question and answer session. The claimant is sworn under oath.
And the claimant's the injured worker.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. My client, the plaintiff. And that person then is asked questions by the defense attorney under oath and required to give truthful answers. I'm present during the deposition with my client. Sometimes, again, we do this by Zoom, but I'm on the Zoom call when that happens. And we also talk to our clients ahead of time and get them prepared for this so they know what's going on and have a little bit better idea about the questions that are going to be asked and how these depositions occur. But the deposition is what we call discovery. It's a chance to let the defendant find out about you. It's a chance for the defendant to size you up a little bit to see if they think you're actually injured, telling the truth, those kind of things. It's not really a chance to prove your entire case. It's just a chance for the defendant to find out a little bit more about you.
They're gathering factual evidence and evidence based on your testimony. And in that regard, it's not all that unlike a car wreck, right? Some of these things get settled. Some of these things go to litigation.
Very similar to a car accident, yes. If you've been in a car accident and it's had to be litigated, you've probably given your deposition too in a car accident, or if you've been a witness to one of these things. I tell folks it's a lot like going to the dentist. They hate going through one, but afterwards it's not that bad. Basically, you tell the truth, you're asked questions, and you respond to it. If you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. You don't make anything up. A lot of the questions the defense already knows. Other questions they want to find out about, like how were you injured and how you're doing now. We discuss those and how that impacts your case. But the deposition is pretty much normal in every workers' compensation claim. And again, it's more or less a chance for the defense to find out about you. It's not really the place where you prove your claim, but a lot of information about your claim comes out at the deposition. And it just basically is part of the process. There'll be a transcript of the deposition generated, which means there's actually a court reporter participating in it that will type down the actual words that both parties say, and they'll create a transcript with all the questions and all the answers that can be looked at later on. And that's why it's important if you're having certain problems to mention those in the deposition, because if you're having problems and they ask you what problems you're having and you omit 4 or 5 things, and then later on you bring those up, they will say, remember we took your deposition, you said you had these problems, and now you got these other ones. Were you injured between the deposition and now this point where you're testifying? So we get the clients prepared for all those possible scenarios. Again, it's part of the normal discovery process. It's not really that traumatic. I think most people get upset about the thought of it, but it's basically just somebody asking you some questions. And it's not like the Perry Mason stuff on TV or the judge is going to make a ruling or anything at the deposition. It's more of an informal proceeding where people are just trying to find out what's going on with the claim.
Right. Is the injured worker, are they sworn in before they give a deposition?
Correct. Yeah, they're sworn in, and their testimony is supposed to be truthful, and if they're giving answers they know are lies, and actually they're committing perjury. So
right.
They are sworn under oath, and penalties apply if you're lying.
Right.
We explained all that before too. Now, after the deposition occurs, a lot of times everybody can evaluate the case a little bit better, and sometimes we're able to resolve the claims then. But if the claim is not resolved, then we will have what's called a formal hearing in front of the administrative law judge. And in the past, we would go to the hearing site, and wherever it was at in Kentucky, there were about 7 or 8 different places: Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, etc. Here, since the pandemic's occurred, we've been conducting hearings through Zoom video conferencing service, and that does not require anybody to travel. So this is actually a benefit from the pandemic for somebody who lives out of state. You don't have to come back to Kentucky for the hearing. You can participate that from the comfort of your own home through the Zoom conference call. And the judge is located in his office. I'm at my office. There's a court reporter that's typing stuff down, a defense attorney participating, and then the claimant, the plaintiff, my client, is in another location. And like the deposition, we sit down and get everybody prepared for that ahead of time. Let them know what kind of questions are going to be asked and how that proceeds. The court reporter, again, creates a written transcript of all the documents. But from an out-of-state perspective, again, this is something that may not require your presence. As we open up from the pandemic, they may require the actual presence of the plaintiff, my client, at the hearing. That has not formally been adopted yet that I know of. It may be shortly, and that might be another reason that somebody has to come to Kentucky, because it was very unusual to have a hearing that wasn't in person up until the pandemic hit. But I have a feeling the process has been working very well without in-person hearings, and a lot of the judges in Kentucky for the workers' comp system have to travel from one hearing site to another, and it's just a lot easier for the judges. It's a lot less expensive to pay for their travel to conduct a Zoom hearing, and probably it's a little bit faster because we don't have to wait for them to be in a certain location to have the hearing again. So I have a feeling in the future we'll continue most of these hearings through Zoom because it's just too efficient not to. So that actually makes it a little bit easier if you're from out of state, out of town, to participate in a workers' compensation claim. It requires less travel and moves the claim along a little bit faster, and we're able to bring a resolution a little bit easier to you if you live out of state.
Well, like what you just said, out of town as well. I mean, this also applies to somebody who lives here in Kentucky and has hired you out of Louisville to handle the case, right?
Right. I do have certain claimants that live, even outside of Louisville, where I'm located, that live in other parts of the state, and we're able to conduct these things seamlessly almost. As long as they have capability to participate in Zoom, which usually just requires a cell phone that has video on it.
Right.
So if you've got an Apple iPhone, you're okay. Just about anything that you can load Zoom on, have FaceTime with, will work in this process. One of the things that's interesting for out-of-state claimant is the medical treatment. For instance, if you're injured in Kentucky, you have a Kentucky workers' compensation claim, but let's say you live in Montana. The doctors in Montana are probably not familiar with how we do things in Kentucky, and sometimes have to be educated about what we need as far as impairment ratings and restrictions and stuff like that to figure out what your case is worth. There's also some things that govern payment about the doctors. Most of the time, doctors that accept workers' compensation claims will accept full payment for the Kentucky workers' compensation insurance carrier, but sometimes being an out-of-state claimant can result in some interesting payment issues that we can help people resolve. But the medical treatment itself, usually we just need a report from the doctor that kind of summarizes what somebody's been through. The medical treatment itself, there's really no reason to come back to Kentucky for that. I think you're getting as well or better medical treatment outside of Kentucky as you would in. So the medical treatment itself is not a big thing. If you're out of state, you can do that without a problem. And we can generally educate the doctors about what we need as far as your case to proceed with it and prove your damages and the benefits you're entitled to receive.
So much of this really comes down to the medical records as that
Right.
evidence, right? So
Right.
as long as they document, which physicians do anyway,
Right.
But as long as they're having detailed medical reports that you have access to, that becomes part of the file.
Right. And medical records are a big part of any workers' compensation claim because it documents the problems and how people are recovering and how they're dealing with the particular injury, and those have all gotten automated. It's very rare to get paper medical records anymore. Most of the providers have joined bigger practices where almost all the medical records have been digitalized and are submitted electronically from one provider to another. We can generally get those either sent to us through a electronic means, faxed, or if we have to, we'll get them by paper. But obtaining medical records has gotten a little bit easier because everybody's generally using electronic medical records. So that actually helps somebody from out of state too. It makes it a little bit easier to get the records, and it makes the transmission of them a little bit easier too. And we're able to look at those and work with them faster too. So it's been interesting how things have evolved over the last 20 or 30 years in workers' compensation, where you sometimes had to go down to the doctor's office, get everything you needed, drag the client into your office, go down the street to the judge. We can basically do everything that we had to do in person now remotely. And for somebody that lives out of state with a Kentucky workers' compensation claim, that just makes their life a lot easier. For the most part, you can do almost everything in a claim outside of Kentucky with the exception of probably getting a doctor in Kentucky to give you an impairment rating. The judges still like to have a doctor they know give you a rating so they can kind of use that as a benchmark. But other than that, there's really no reason that you can't proceed with a claim in Kentucky if you've never actually been here for the last 2 or 3 years. You can still do everything remotely from home. You generally don't have to travel except for that one doctor's visit. And it's really, if anything, the pandemic's been something that's helped people from out of state proceed with their workers' compensation claims.
And the key in that is really, again, if you don't live here within the borders of Kentucky, is just being able to track back and substantiate somehow that there is a tie to Kentucky or a Kentucky located business. And that sometimes takes a little digging, I would think.
Yeah, well, we've got to sit down, and there's a complicated statute that talks about what we call extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And there's about 4 different scenarios that can play out to where you can actually be injured outside of the state of Kentucky and have an injury in Kentucky. In general, you have to be working for either a Kentucky employer and you were hired in Kentucky, or you were working from an out-of-state employer and you were injured while in Kentucky.
Right.
There's a lot of exceptions to everything we say, but if you think you've got a strong Kentucky connection somehow, it doesn't hurt to call somebody in this state just to run this past them, because like I said before, Kentucky benefits are generally a lot better than any other state's benefits.
Well, and it was interesting that you said if you were injured in Kentucky, even though the other scenarios don't really apply. So a long-distance over-the-road truck driver who's hurt, in the course of business, that could, again, qualify for a Kentucky workers' comp claim.
Yeah, I've actually had several cases where people were paid underneath Oklahoma workers' comp because that's where they were hired at and that's where their company was from. But the truck driver was driving through Kentucky and dropping off a load here and hurt his back while dropping off a load in Erlanger. Well, he has a Kentucky workers' compensation claim. I'm not admitted in Oklahoma. I got a feeling he would have an Oklahoma claim. I don't know. But I do know he has a Kentucky workers' compensation claim because he was injured here. But a lot of times the benefits are less in other states, and the employer generally tries to pay you the least amount they can. So if you were injured in Kentucky, even though it's for an out-of-state company, I would strongly advise you to talk to somebody in the state of Kentucky to see if you can apply for Kentucky workers' compensation benefits and compare those to the benefits that you're receiving, and then make a decision about which claim you want to proceed.
Right.
And then actually, in some cases, you can proceed with both claims. And I don't want to get too technical here, but the bottom line is talk to a couple of people and figure out what's going on, and listen to what they have to say. But just don't forget that you have a possible Kentucky case too.
Yeah, and Scott, this is your 25th year in practice. So again, you've been doing this for a little while, so you've seen a lot of different scenarios.
Actually, it's more than 25 years in practice, but we've had our own private practice for about 25 years, but I practiced for several years before that for other folks, so we're actually in the 3-decade category, but I don't want to go down that road too far. And it's been interesting to see how things have changed.
Right.
Like I said, it used to be a lot more personal. And to me, it's more interesting this way. We can accommodate and help more people and actually do more things because, our market's been expanded a little bit. And I think in the long run, it's probably going to reduce cost and make things a little bit more efficient. It'll be interesting to see what happens after the pandemic's over about what we have to do in person. But a lot of this is just too easy to do, and it would be harder to go back the old way. But I'm not the person at the Department of Workers' Claims making all those decisions, and those folks are a lot smarter than me, Commissioner. So I'm hoping they make the right decisions. I think they will. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, I tell you what, overall, it's just great news. If I'm banged up and I'm down in Tennessee or I'm down in Alabama or Mississippi or somewhere else, and the last thing I want to do with a back injury is get in the car and drive for a few hours just to come up and see, the attorney and come up and do all this stuff. So, there's actually a huge advantage for the injured worker. Look, stay at home where you're comfortable, and we'll handle it for you.
Yeah, and again, if you don't get into litigation, you may never have to come to the state of Kentucky. I've had folks that have processed their entire claim without having to do that. But a lot of times, the only time you really have to come up here is to get a doctor's evaluation for a Kentucky doctor that the administrative law judges are familiar with. For the most part, almost everything else can be handled out of state from the beginning to the end, including cashing your check. So, even if you're in Georgia, Indiana, Oklahoma, if you got injured in Kentucky, think you have a Kentucky nexus to the injury, give a Kentucky attorney a call, talk to them a little bit about what's going on, see if you've got a possible claim here, compare that to the benefits that you're getting, and make some informed decisions.
Well, Scott, if somebody's listening to this right now and says, hey, you know what, that may actually be me. I may have that Kentucky case, and again, I'm not local. What's the best office phone number for them to use for you?
My best office phone number is 502-937-5287. That's my office, and if you call that number, we will get back with you. We have a website also, ScheynostLaw.com, and you can contact us through the website. And we're happy to talk to you about your case. We're happy to go over the facts. Again, we handle these on what's called a contingency fee, which means we don't charge you anything unless we get money for you. We obviously give everybody a free consultation. I like to talk, if you can't tell by listening to the webcast. Generally, you will end up talking to me in addition to some of my staff. But you almost always will end up talking to me. I am an attorney in licensed practice in Kentucky, and I can give you a little bit more, I think, indication about where your case is going than some of the firms that just use paralegals to vet out the cases. So I'm happy to talk to you about your claim, go over it with you, give you my 2 cents about what's going on, and look forward to hearing from you.
Hey, and Scott, obviously as a contingency fee attorney here, we're required to state that court cost and other case-related expenses are responsibility of the client, but all that gets handled at the back end if there is an actual financial award here at the end of the case. So really, it doesn't cost anything for them to pick up the phone and engage with you, and even to hire you to represent them, correct?
Right, that's correct. We charge a fee, and then there's expenses incurred that will also be deducted out of what the client has. But we're happily going to explain all that stuff and how that works if you give us a call. The bottom line is it doesn't cost anything to call me right now. If you don't want us to help you, that's fine. I'm not going to charge you anything for just talking to you on the phone. If you want to talk a little bit more, we'll be happy to do that. But folks, I think sometimes think we're going to charge a fee just to answer the phone or have a sit-down consultation with them, but that's not the case.
Right.
You really don't owe us any money until we've done something for you as far as a fee.
Yep. Scott, I appreciate your time. If you've been out there listening, again, I hope you found this information valuable. And if you've been injured in the state of Kentucky or outside of the state of Kentucky, Scott Scheynost is ready to take your call, speak with you, and at the end of the day, work on your case for you with a tremendous amount of experience, obviously. Scott, thanks again for your time, guy.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hurt at Work. Scott will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. For more information, be sure to visit ScheynostLaw.com. That's SCHEYNOST law.com. You can also follow Scott's Workers' Comp office on Facebook. Until next time, be safe and remember, Scott's ready to help, especially when you and your family need it the most.